Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vicini. We are presented by The Athletic. Today on the show, one of my favorite guests, Jovan Buha, is in the building, and we wanted to talk about actual, sort of basketball things that could maybe happen. I know that the offseason is time for weird speculation about who the GOAT is, who's better than some ex-player, who is historically better than Bob Cousy, right? But
Those
I don't know. What plumber is better than Bob Cousy? So I wanted to talk about something that could affect this upcoming season, and it feels like the Lakers to me are kind of the livest ammo team right now. They have the most going on. LeBron James just signed his 2-year extension, which is really a 1+1. They have the Russell Westbrook situation hanging over their heads a little bit. They've kind of even said it feels like that they're a little bit active right now, unlike most teams. So I wanted to talk to Jovan just about what is happening with the Los Angeles Lakers and where they sit in the Western Conference hierarchy, because this is a weird situation where they have LeBron James, they have Anthony Davis, they have this strange situation that is Russell Westbrook kind of hanging over their head. They were very active in free agency, although I don't know how much their moves actually change the direction for them and move the needle. So there's just a lot going on with the Lakers, and I wanted to talk to Jovan. So what's going on, man?
How's it going, man? It's been a fun but busy, but kind of not busy off season. It's been weird.
Yeah.
It's just been waiting in anticipation for something to happen. I guess LeBron's extension counts as something, but I think the big domino obviously is the Russ situation.
So let's talk about the LeBron extension very quickly. Let's get that off of kind of the plate. So that was actually a really important domino, because he was potentially a free agent next offseason if he wanted to be. And the decision to sign that extension now extends the window for the Lakers by one more year and gives them a little bit more certainty and clarity on what they should be doing with this Russell Westbrook situation. Do you kind of track that kind of across the board?
Yeah. I think this puts them honestly more on the clock to trade Westbrook and make a more of a win now move, just because you now have that certainty from LeBron that he's going to be here at least one more year, if not two, depending on what happens with Bronny. Because I think if you're going all in and it was potentially going to, potentially taking on, in most scenarios, they're going to have to take on some longer term money. Some of these, even if trading for a Kyrie, you're probably re-signing him or looking to re-sign him next summer. So I think for them to take on that longer term risk, and they don't have some of their picks coming up, that they have certain pick swaps, with New Orleans and stuff. So I think for them to take on that risk and potentially trade 2 draft picks for a franchise that again has because of the Anthony Davis trade has not had their full assortment of draft picks and has drafted really well, as you and I have discussed a few times. Like their track record's impressive. But of course, when you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, you are in win now mode. And I think that was already the case before the LeBron extension. But this to me is a signal that they've had discussions on the future of this team. I think they're both on the same page that as currently constructed, they're not a contender. And really the only path to make a significant upgrade is trading Russell Westbrook. So I think that is the path that they're going to pursue over the next few weeks. I think they're going to up their aggression in terms of making sure at least 1 pick is involved, but most likely 2, and trying to get something done with Brooklyn for Kyrie Irving, Indiana potentially with Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. I think Utah is kind of the dark horse here, where depending on what happens with Donovan Mitchell, it's kind of this weird gridlock right now where you got the whole Kevin Durant situation kind of tying everything up with Brooklyn. But then you also have the Donovan Mitchell situation tying stuff up with New York and Utah. And I think if one of those situations gets resolved in the next few weeks, which at least one of the 2 probably will, I think that's where you could see that kind of fall into place for the Lakers, where if Utah cleans house and sends out Donovan Mitchell and just enters a full rebuilding mode, then I think you could see, Bojan Bogdanovic and Pat Beverly and Jordan Clarkson maybe to the Lakers for Russ and a pick, Russ and 2 picks, but maybe one of the picks has heavy protections or like a pick swap or something. But some type of deal where Utah recoups some assets and just kind of sends out players that they don't really need. And then for the Lakers, it's not really moving the needle, but I think it's better than the status quo because I think they're short on depth and kind of top tier talent. So at least in that scenario, I think you're increasing the depth of near the top of your roster. So I think the LeBron extension was a big domino. It really was. Like the 2 pillars of the offseason were going to be LeBron's extension and Russ's situation. And so far they're 1 for 2 and things going well. And I think the next step is really just going all in on trading Russ and making the best of it, because they also have to get someone to take him on, right? Because I think a lot of the talk about the second pick is, whether they're willing to include it, but you also have to find a team that actually is still willing to take him on, even with a second pick involved. And that's not a certainty right now.
Well, it's not the easiest thing in the world because his contract is so large.
Yeah.
Like that's ultimately what it comes down to. Just like mechanically, there are so few assets out there league wide that, or at least singular assets, where you can match his salary and then accept the picks, basically. Or that you want to match his salary with that player, because obviously most of the players in the league that have that high end salary end up being guys that are max level players. And at one time, Russell Westbrook was a max level player. Unfortunately, he is not that guy really anymore. But it creates a very difficult spot where you have to kind of, add up contracts to where you have to get to it. And like the Jazz one is interesting, like Bojan, Jordan Clarkson, Pat Beverly, like you can kind of add up the deals that you need to make those kind of situations work because of the deal that they accomplished for Rudy Gobert because someone wanted Rudy. And unfortunately, it doesn't feel like a lot of teams want Russ at his current salary. I'm glad that you brought up the idea of LeBron's deal, having them go 1 for 2 now, because it feels like from the reporting at the very least that the Kyrie Irving chase is largely in part being pushed by LeBron. That is what the media reporting tells you. And just to be honest, like I've been on vacation. I haven't really tried to do a lot of reporting on my end on this to see. So I'll just ask you, does it feel that way? Does it feel like to you that LeBron is kind of pushing the Kyrie Irving chase as opposed to the front office potentially trying to push for the Kyrie Irving chase?
Yes. Yes, that is my understanding from what I've been told. I think LeBron is aware that they need to improve the roster. I think most people would agree on that the roster isn't where they would want it to be for them to truly contend. And I think looking at the options, I don't think it's, going out on a limb to say the Kyrie Irving trade is the trade that I think would move the needle the most for them. You're getting back a top 15, top 20 at worst player, at least offensive talent. And, again, I think depth would still be an issue for this team. But when you have 3 top 20 guys, we've seen that work historically. And I think, Kyrie just fits so much better than Russell Westbrook. Even if it ends up, it probably wouldn't be a 1 for 1, but even if it was just kind of principally a 1 for 1, just his fit. We've seen it with LeBron already, but I'm just imagining Kyrie AD pick and rolls and just the options that you would have there, and his ability to, one of the things that the Lakers really struggled with last year was, second consecutive season that LeBron and AD were both injured for almost half the year, and Russ wasn't able to carry the load the way he has in the past. Like that was part of the appeal of bringing in Russ, was like, okay, if LeBron's out, if AD is out, Russ can slide up, be that second guy, even be the focal point in some scenarios, and carry us the way he's carried, mediocre supporting cast in OKC or Washington, or helped in Houston. But he didn't do that last year. They were 20 and 32 in games that LeBron and or AD missed that Russ played in. So they were, basically that translates to their record of 33-49. Like they basically won at the same rate. And Russ, his numbers weren't dramatically better without those guys. Like, so I think, I think that they're in an interesting spot because they have to get better. And I think we know LeBron has a track record of never, not being complacent, never really being happy with the roster, always tinkering and wanting to make improvements. And I think, Kyrie has expressed an interest in playing in LA, earlier in the offseason. And I think now he's kind of walked that back a little bit and is being a good soldier. And I think is content with staying in Brooklyn possibly. But I think if he does leave Brooklyn, like LA makes the most sense. LA is probably the most interested suitor. And he has previously had an interest in playing in LA and playing with LeBron again. So I think part of that extension, part of the talks with that was certainly strategy and how, like, what's the next step for us? How are we going to build out this team? And LeBron getting on board with that. So, because I had heard, I'd basically been hearing for weeks that he's going to sign the extension. It's just a matter of when. But there's also kind of the leverage play of it, of LeBron doesn't, I think LeBron lost some leverage with the front office with the Russ trade and just the way that was such an epic failure. And he was one of the driving people behind that and ultimately signed off on it. So I think there's been kind of a loss of leverage there a little bit. And, part of him regaining some of that was having this contract extension and kind of having that dangling carrot there. So I think, I also think LeBron is cognizant of, like, what's being reported and what's out there and his image. And we know he's very calculated. So I don't think he would ever kind of strong arm them, like, to that extent. But I think he's made it clear he wants Kyrie Irving. He wants the roster to get better. If they can't get Kyrie, get something that improves this team. So that's, I think, going to be the mission over the next month or so before training camp.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the idea of Russ being the guy that was, like, supposed to carry the load when Anthony Davis and LeBron missed games. I was with that. Like, I actually, like, was ready to bet on the Lakers over. I don't know if I was ready to bet on the Lakers over win total last year, but I was like, look, if there's anything Russ can do, Russ can just stem the tide for them. Like, they'll be fine as long as one of those two guys is on the court with Russ. Like, it'll be fine in the regular season, and then I would, like, kind of sell them in the playoffs. But in the regular season, I thought it would be fine, and it ended up not being that. And it ended up being kind of a disaster. And it leaves Russ in a fascinating situation. Now, Russ obviously had a very public, I don't even want to say falling out necessarily, public parting of the ways with his agent, Thad Fouché, earlier this offseason. And in a move that I've just never seen in a high profile agent pull out before, Thad Fouché said that he and Russ just have very different opinions on where Russ's career is going. And he explained why. And in large part, it was that Thad thought that Russ should want to stay in LA and try and make it work there. Can you ever remember an agent doing something like that? Because I can't. That was wild.
And I've talked to people around the team, around the league, and no one could recall anything this public.
Yeah, that was pretty insane. And I talked about it briefly on the show with Fred Katz when we talked about Russ. I thought it was not a move that an agent should pull, especially one that has been with Russ for over a decade, has made a lot of money with Russ, has really done quite a good job of representing his best interests over the course of his career. And more importantly, in the case of Russ, a guy that likes to be a very private individual. You essentially just blew up the spot of a guy that, like, if we know anything about Russ, it's that he absolutely adores his privacy. He wants as little information out there about him as possible. And I just didn't, that didn't sit super well with me. But in terms of the way that it impacts where this goes moving forward, where is Russ at this point? Like, do we have any idea, like, what Russ wants, where he sees his career as, where all of this where all of this goes for Russ moving forward, because that's what I'm like kind of struggling with. Like, is there a spot where he can go and be a starting regular season point guard? And is there a spot that works for him that makes sense? Like, does the team that acquires him just end up buying him out at the end of the day? Like, I'm trying to figure out what the end game is here for Russ in a way that is a bit difficult, I think, right now.
Yeah, well, and I think the other interesting part of that whole situation is Thad himself is someone who is very private. And, I think you obviously know a lot of agents. And, when I got my break, first break, started covering the Clippers, they had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was rep by Thad. And that was kind of the feedback I got right away, is this isn't someone who he's not really interested in the fraternizing and sort of, playing the news game and all that stuff, or speaking to reporters and all. Like he's just been kind of a private behind the scenes guy. So I think for him to come out with a statement that publicly, obviously the relationship ended on not great terms. And I think for him to feel the need to do that, you got to think it was pretty ugly behind the scenes for that to be his reaction. Cause I think that was obviously calculated, but I also think it was an emotional reaction to the situation. He might probably in shock. Like, I never thought I thought I would be his agent for his whole career. And things got to a point where, cause I think mutual parting of ways, like essentially it's typically a firing, but like a nice way of saying a firing, more often than not. Right. I mean, there's or at least one party wants it more than the other. Maybe both sides are ready to move on, but like it's very rarely a 50-50 divorce in the NBA.
Right.
So I think that was interesting, but I think if we just look at, like, there's been a lot of speculation on Russ and sort of what does he want, what's going on. But like, if we just go by what we know and what is factual and indisputable, I mean, go back to his exit interview. He basically threw everybody under the bus. He threw the organization under the bus. He threw Frank Vogel under the bus. He threw LeBron and AD under the bus. He threw the fan base under the bus. Like, it was basically just shots at everybody. And some of them were a little more veiled, but like he made it clear, like, he was kind of burning the bridge on the way out. Like, it was very shocking to see the way that he conducted himself in that exit interview. And like, for those who have not seen it, I would go to YouTube and watch it. And like, I feel like it didn't get as much of attention as it probably should have. That was because the playoffs were starting and like, we're talking about the Vogel firing and stuff. But like, that to me was like very kind of eyebrow raising press conference. Then he, has the non-interaction with LeBron at Summer League. I sat right behind LeBron. Just so happened that's where I was seated. He comes in right before the buzzer, sits there, and I'm seeing everybody come up to this guy like he's the Godfather. And Rob Pelinka, Darvin Ham, all the players in attendance, and the one guy who doesn't come up is Russell Westbrook, who leaves on the opposite end of the floor at halftime. And then you have a few days later, he fires his agent, and his agent releases the statement that he released, which, reading between the lines of the statement, was essentially like Russ doesn't have the self-awareness to accept where he's at currently and where the league views him at currently. And he's likely going to be traded. Although now you have to attach assets versus in the past when you were getting assets for giving up assets to get Russ. And essentially kind of implicated, like, Russ doesn't want to be in LA. Russ wants to be, Russ wants a fresh start. He wants to be somewhere else. And he thinks if he pushes for a trade, it's going to be like, the perfect situation for him going somewhere else where realistically anyone who trades for him is probably going to try to buy him out. So I think just going off of that, like, it's not optimistic. And from what I've heard recently, he still wants out and does not want to be, a Laker ideally. I don't think he has interest in, Darvin Ham has kind of almost talked about like this Drew Holiday-esque role of like, he's the captain of the defense and he's going to be a defense first player. And, that they're going to figure out different ways to use him without the ball in his hands. And like, a lot of that stuff is also similar to what Frank Vogel said last training camp and going, media days. So I'm, count me skeptical until I see Russ do that and do that. Not only do it, but like do it consistently. Because at the beginning of last season, I think he was a little bit passive, a little bit okay. I'm going to kind of fit in, and then quickly within the first 5 to 10 games, he reverted to I'm going to play the way I've always played, and I'm Russ. So I guess from what I've heard, I think he still wants out, and I think there's just a matter of there's not really much of a market for him. And, the market is dictating that the Lakers give up a couple of picks, and they've been hesitant to do that, especially for non-needle moving, moves aside from the Kyrie trade. I don't think they really view any of these moves as needle making. So, or needle moving. So I think it's in a tough spot, but I think both sides are ready to move on. I don't think there would be much love lost on either side. And that's why I think the LeBron extension and kind of some of the stuff that's trickled out since then indicates to me that they are eventually going to move Russ, and probably around the start of training camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that is the best piece of evidence that Russ doesn't really want to be there is just the Fouché statement, right? At the end of the day, Thad Fouché basically said that Russell Westbrook wants a trade. And that's where I was like a little bit fucked up with it, because I was like, wait, this is a very private guy, and you just like put on blast that he kind of wants out. And that wasn't really public information anymore. Like, yeah. I'm sure that you were hearing that behind the scenes, but that publicly, that was not like a widely available piece of information. Am I wrong about that?
No. I mean, I do think like there aren't many signs he wants to be there either.
Sure.
Again, because he had the whole thing where he deleted all his posts on Instagram, and had the one video where he was wearing a Laker, saying one of one or whatever he said. But yeah, I mean, I think again, and look, there's two sides to every story. We haven't gotten Russ's side. I'm sure he has a different version of events, and I'm sure he'll be asked about it at media day wherever he is, be it LA or a new situation. But I don't think we're gonna get much from him. So all we have to go on is that. And again, like I want to give Russ the benefit of the doubt, and I want to take what Dad said with a little bit of a grain of salt. But at the same time, from everything I know about him, he isn't one of these guys that really, plays the game and is trying to get attention to himself, and is, he's not really sitting courtside chopping it up with a bunch of media people. Like, that's just not how he operates. So for him to come out with a statement that was so shocking and so public, like that to me was, again, partly a sign, but also a sign of like, he's just letting the clip fly of like, this is actually what, like this is the truth. I'm just letting it all out, and almost like talking to Russ kind of through the media of like, hey, if you won't listen to me and you're still trying to force your way out and find a new situation, I'm just going to publicly out it and hope that gets through to you. So yeah, I've never seen anything like that. I don't know if we'll ever see anything like that again, but
I don't know if we will either.
It was pretty crazy.
The difference, so you mentioned the name Jrue Holiday, which is the name that Darvin Ham has brought up. Obviously having been a former assistant coach with the Milwaukee Bucks, Frank Vogel has brought up the idea of this before. Here's the difference. Jrue Holiday shot 41% on pull-up threes last year. Like, Jrue Holiday.
We're not even talking defense either. Like,
yeah, we're not talking defense yet.
There's a giant gap there.
There's a chasm there, but like, just fundamentally, it's a different player at the end of the day. Like, Jrue Holiday is a drastically different player than Russell Westbrook, and that's okay. It's just that Jrue Holiday and his game is tailor-made to play with superstars, because he can shoot off the dribble, he can shoot off the catch, he is a phenomenal defender, he is a completely unselfish player, all of that. Russell Westbrook defensively has all of the tools to be a great player, but throughout his career has been more of a gambler that has tried to start transition opportunities, and has been more of a he's willing to leave his man in order to chase rebounds kind of guy. And in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma City built a scheme around that for it to be successful. Like Steven Adams is one of the best players in the NBA at boxing out. And they essentially had Russ crash every time on the defensive glass to start the early offense by getting the ball, grabbing and going. And he was such downhill force at that point that it made sense to do that. And now that's just not going to be the case anymore. And you're not going to build a defensive scheme around Russ's deficiencies and around his strengths, frankly. You're going to have to make him work within the scheme. And I just don't know if any real team is going to want to do that. Like the level to which the Lakers were better defensively with Austin Reeves out on the court defensively this year was very high. Like Austin Reeves just knows where he has to be all the time. He's really smart. He's really intuitive. You look at their tools, like Austin Reeves doesn't have half of the tools physically that Russell Westbrook does, but he has the biggest one, which is up here in terms of his brain, in terms of the way that he thinks the game through. And I think Russ has always been like a really underrated basketball IQ guy. I think that throughout his career, like he is just kind of a basketball savant that knew how to make things work, especially out in transition and out in the open court. But he doesn't have the athletic tools to fall back on anymore. And I think that Austin Reeves and guys like that just make it work a little bit more defensively, in part because of effort as well. Like, let's just be real with it. Russ's effort defensively at times can wane. So yeah, I just don't know if you're an opposing team, you know, what do you give up for Russ? And I guess like, let's kind of move the transition of the conversation that way. Like, I don't know, outside of the Kyrie Irving potential move for 2 first-round picks, that I have seen a deal that makes sense across the board for everyone. The Kyrie one, where it's Kyrie for Russ and the Nets get 2 first-round picks, that makes sense to me. The Pacers one, where it's like Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, I felt like Lakers fans were like, yeah, like we'll give up like a first rounder or a few second rounders with that. And it's just like, no, like the Pacers are going to want a first round pick to take on Russ alone. And Miles Turner, like I'd been kind of told they'd turn down like good first rounders in the 2022 NBA draft for Miles Turner. So I don't really, so it's going to be multiple first round picks for a Buddy Hield, Miles Turner deal. For the Jazz, like, you know, you mentioned Boyan, Jordan Clarkson, Pat Beverly. I like that deal to an extent. I like Buddy Hield and Miles Turner more, and I'd rather just give up the multiple picks to do that if Kyrie isn't on the table. Did you see a deal, though, outside of the Kyrie deal that makes sense for the Lakers if they decide to do something like this?
I think the Indiana deal would require 2 picks, but I think I'm at the point that it's probably worth it. Like I almost think like any deal. I mean, even kind of salary dumping him to San Antonio, and I mean that would probably be a little bit hard to make, you know, the money work there. But I'm of the mindset that it's going to be an addition by subtraction situation. I've even heard that, you know, I think if they can't trade him, like one thing I reported was that Darvin Ham has the green light this upcoming season to coach Russ hard and coach him the way that Frank Vogel wasn't really able to. If you remember, Frank Vogel had to, you know, kind of consult the front office and get permission to bench Russ, and they had meetings about it. And you know, really we're kind of strategizing about what's the best way to handle Russ. Like from what I've been told, Darvin Ham is going to have that green light of, if Russ is dogging it defensively, if he's taking threes in transition, and if he's not boxing out his man and he's just gambling defense, like he, you know, reduces minutes. And if he doesn't respond to that, bring him off the bench. And if he doesn't respond to that, send him home. And we'll just roll with the other, you know, 13 guys we got on the roster. And, you know, that's an addition by subtraction situation. So I think basically John Wall in Houston. Although I don't think it was as contentious as
Yeah,
Lakers
wasn't
Russ
nearly as
situation was.
contentious. I want to be clear about that. The
Yeah,
John Wall thing was just not contentious at all.
But sort of that principal idea of just like, hey, we'll pay you your $47 million, but you're gonna be at home with your family while that happens, and you're not gonna be playing. So I think, honestly, like, I think any of the deals are worth it. Now, you can, where I quibble is like, is it worth 2 picks to Utah for like that package? Or if Charlotte maybe re-enters the mix and it's Gordon Hayward and something else for, like, I don't know if 2 picks is worth it then, but and there's interesting, like, you could do a pick swap, you can do a lottery protected pick. Like, there are kind of ways to make it optically be 2 picks, but not technically be 2 picks. Obviously you're well versed in that, but I guess I just think, like, if you're the Lakers, and I know you want to get into like the hierarchy, but like, I view their range right now as like probably a 6 to 9 seed. And in 3 of those 4 scenarios, you're in the play-in tournament. And to be in the play-in tournament with LeBron and AD is a failure. Like, I mean, those are 2 top 10, top 12 guys. And like, to not have the right supporting cast around them, and to go from being a championship team a couple of years ago, and then to being a playoff team that was up 2-1 on Phoenix, and then AD goes down, they lose that series, but then to have back-to-back years, 1 year not even making the play-in tournament, and then potentially a second year being in the play-in tournament, like, that's a failure in roster building. And I don't think it's all on the front office or ownership. Like, there is some of that on LeBron and AD, and like there's plenty of blame to go around, but and the coaching staff and stuff. But I just think, it's a collective failure, and for them to probably be in that position again if they don't make a move, that's to me where like the pressure kicks in of, why do you have LeBron James on your roster if you're not trying to win a championship? Like, it doesn't make sense. And Rob Pelinka talked about it at his exit interview, that he was like, I want to, I'm like the steward of the end of LeBron's legacy. And like, if you are viewing it that way, then you got to go all in. And who knows, maybe they make the best possible offer to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn says, no, we want to keep Kyrie. Like, okay, then move on to Indiana. And if Indiana says no, then move on to Utah. Like, but you got to do something, because I think there's a chance that if they get the right pieces, like that 2020 team, on one hand, I think was better than people gave them credit for, but on the other hand, like, it really was LeBron and AD and some really nice fitting 2-way role players. And if you can get that mix around them again, maybe you don't win a championship. The top of the league is loaded, but at least you give yourself a shot, where in a 7-game playoff series, no one wants to face a healthy LeBron and AD. Like, that's going to be tough, no matter how bad the supporting cast is. So I'm of the mindset that, I think Brooklyn makes the most sense, of course. Indiana to me is a clear second, and then probably Utah. Utah versus Charlotte's probably close for me, but I think that they got to make some type of move, because I just think standing pat, you're going to be a play-in team probably, and that's just not good, right? Like, it's not, like, you're kind of wasting that into LeBron's career.
Well, and you brought up like all of those specific deals, right? Like, go get Kyrie. Like, we've talked about that.
Sure,
like, if you can do that, go do that. The Utah move, right? The Utah move would be Boyan, Jordan Clarkson, Pat Bev. Jordan Clarkson and Boyan aren't really the 2-way types that they won with in 2020, right? Like, Boyan is a really, really good basketball player, and he would thrive playing next to LeBron and Anthony Davis because of his shooting ability. There aren't many better spot-up shooters in the NBA, just like point blank period, than Boyan Bogdanovic. And he'd work there, but then you have Clarkson, and obviously Pat Bev, I think, would actually really work there as well. It's a deal that makes sense. I don't know that I would want to give up like 2 firsts for it. Like, I think I would. That is probably where I'd cut the line a little bit. I do think the Pacers deal makes them like pretty drastically better, because I think Miles Turner makes them drastically better.
I mean, he's with my ideal front court fit with LeBron and AD.
Yeah, like with his ability to shoot and his incredible impact as a rim protector defensively. This is a team that, when they won the title with Frank Vogel, they really liked playing big. It would help the wear and tear on both Miles Turner and Anthony Davis, I think, to play together to some extent. And then you can play them together is the thing. Like, you don't have to stagger them. Like, you actually can competently play them together because you can camp out Miles Turner in the corner and he's a threat to shoot from three. You can camp him out above the break and do some different actions with him because he can shoot threes.
Like, he can play that Brook Lopez role,
Yeah.
I think
he's not a great passer. Like, doesn't, you can't functionally run like sets with him necessarily, but that's part of the thing of having Anthony Davis. Like, you can do all of that with Anthony Davis, and you don't need Miles Turner to be like your downhill rim runner. You don't need him to be like your short roll threat. You can use him as a spot up shooter and then get the defensive value that he brings as one of the 10 best defensive players in the NBA. The Charlotte deal, I don't think makes any sense for Charlotte at this point, because I don't like talking about the Miles Bridges thing outside of, or in the context of basketball. It's just gross. Yeah. Like, that guy should be in prison. But at the end of the day, they can't move Gordon Hayward now. I don't think. Like, they actually need Gordon Hayward positionally if they want to try and make the play-in tournament / playoffs. Like, like, just period. I don't think you can move Russ or move him for Russ. I think that if none of this had happened with Miles Bridges, maybe they were in that position.
That's a good counterpoint.
But, Miles Bridges should be in prison.
I mean, I guess you could also do Rozier. I know that was it was kind of like either Gordon Hayward or Terry Rozier were the base of that. I mean, I never understood it from the perspective of, like, I just don't see Russ and LaMelo being a good fit together. And that feels like something that would stunt LaMelo's growth and development. And because we know, if you're bringing in Russ, especially in a situation like Charlotte, like, he's probably going to become the lead ball handler, or at least co-lead ball, like, more so than he was in LA. So I think, I don't know, maybe they want to buy him out and just get an asset. But yeah, Charlotte, now that I think you brought up a good counterpoint with the Gordon Hayward situation and kind of his value there now. I mean, New York's been another one that's been mentioned with, kind of trading one problem for another with getting back Julius Randle, who I think.
Oh, I don't like that at all.
But yeah, that's not like a great fit. I was wondering if maybe there's a way to do like a Utah, New York, LA 3-way where you get Donovan to New York and then, kind of there's something there. But I mean, I think but the thing with Brooklyn though is you just don't know what Brooklyn wants. And I've heard different things on it where, I've heard they want to clean house and just, like, take back the organization from KD and Kyrie. And, like, it was just such a toxic environment and has become even more toxic this offseason. And then I've also heard they're looking for a win now trade for KD, and they want to keep Kyrie now. And, like, if they do the Boston trade, for example, like, let's go to war with Kyrie and Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart and Ben Simmons. And, like, that's not a contender, but that's at least, like, probably a 5 or 6 seed in the East. So I don't know. I think it really depends on, like, what Brooklyn wants, because if Brooklyn's cleaning house and they just want to recoup assets, Lakers giving them 2 picks is probably as much as they're going to get from anybody for Kyrie. I don't think they're going to get a much better offer. If they're trying to compete and remain, in the playoff mix, then obviously you're not trading for Russ. And there's also just a matter of if they would trade for Russ at all, and if it might require a third team. That if you drag in a third team, they're going to want an asset. And, like, if the Lakers are sending 2 picks to Brooklyn, you can't just pull a third pick out of a hat and send it to this other team. So they're in a tough spot. I think.
Yeah. The only way it works is if Brooklyn is rebuilding. Like, that's the only, or like rebuilding on the fly and moving Kevin Durant, which, by the way, like, according to all reports right now, everything is very quiet in terms of the Kevin Durant situation. I know there was the recent report saying that, what was the report? I can't even remember. It was like a pressure report, basically, from Kevin Durant's camp. It felt like, to try and make a move.
He wanted the GM and the coach fired. He wanted Sean Marks.
Yeah, there we go.
Fired. That's it. And that would be his one way he would stay, which obviously wasn't going to happen. Right. I mean, I think it's become untenable where, like, they're going to have to trade Kevin Durant, or he's just going to hold out and miss training camp or whatever. But
So like here's my thing on that. And I think I'm going to try and do a Nets podcast next week. Nothing that we know about Kevin Durant says that he would be willing to like sit out games or anything. Like the guy just loves basketball. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he just loves it so like purely. And I know that like once you start mixing in money and legacy and things like that, it becomes unpure. But I don't know that I can see Kevin Durant sitting out basketball games because I don't know that like, and look, I don't know Kevin Durant. Like this is just me speculating on just who he seems to be as a person. Um, I can't imagine him not playing, I guess is what I would say. Like he just seems like the kind of guy that I know that he wants to maybe not be in Brooklyn anymore, but if Brooklyn can't find the right move, like I don't think he would disrespect the game in the way that like James Harden in those last days in Houston was not
No,
really
I
trying.
don't think he would do
right.
that. I do think though it's an interesting like he kind of threw a grenade in the whole operation where like calling for your GM and your head coach to be fired, like that's a pretty. It's kind of hard to walk that back. And it's also weird because obviously him and Steve Nash through the years had a really good relationship dating back to Golden State. And, all the reporting at the time was basically that KD and Kyrie had handpicked Steve Nash as their guy, and that's who they wanted. So
now the reports are like walking that back a little bit.
It's just like, unless there's I mean, you never want to say never in the NBA because this is the greatest soap opera in the world. But like, I almost feel like it's disrespectful to Steve Nash to like bring the guy, like, like I could almost see it almost coming from the Nets side of just like, hey, don't report, like,
maybe
we don't want you here now. And I don't know, maybe he does. Maybe they mend fences and he does some interview or something where he kind of clears the air and says, hey, Steve and I have talked, we patched things up. Like, I regret what I said. Like there is a way that he kind of walks it back, but I felt like the smoke around that time had already been, I started to hear, oh, maybe KD's going to stay, that they're really, they're optimistic. And then like, he kind of drops that bomb where it's like, you got to fire the two lead people here and I'll stay. And like, I just feel like that's a hard thing to walk back, but it's possible. But I do feel like the way that's headed, he's going to be traded at some point.
Can I just say, like, sneakily, I said this at the time, I'm still like very interested in watching that Nets team play basketball if we ever get to see them play basketball together.
I mean, if he stayed, like, they'd be so good.
Yeah, I think they're like actually a very interesting constructed team between Ben Simmons and Kyrie and then Kevin Durant obviously, and some of the guards that they have like Patty Mills, and like there are ways to envision that working.
Yeah,
and I think that I will be disappointed that it seems unlikely we're not going to get a chance to see that. The last thing on the Lakers here, and then I'll let you go. Let's say that Russ ends up on the Lakers to start the season. And, it's Anthony Davis, LeBron, Russ. It's, Austin Reeves, Lonnie Walker, Troy Brown, whoever else is on the Lakers roster right now. What does this look like? Like, what is their closing lineup? What is their like starting lineup? How do they function? Like, I don't know the answer to that at this point. And I find it interesting. Like, outside of feeling strongly that Austin Reeves should probably be a part of like most of their successful lineups, I don't know what to do with this weird Lakers roster construction.
I mean, I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that he's their third best and or most important player behind LeBron and AD, which, to go from being an undrafted rookie to that in your second year is pretty crazy. But I think
maybe Thomas Bryant, like if Thomas Bryant's healthy,
I've heard like he's looked good in his workouts. And so I've heard, my understanding of the starting lineup is tentatively Thomas Bryant at center, Anthony Davis and LeBron at the two forward spots, and then Austin Reeves and Russ in the backcourt. And, so I think Darvin, kind of similar to what Milwaukee did, and even seeing some of the success the Lakers have had with playing big, like wants to stay big. The thing with Thomas Bryant is he can shoot the ball. Obviously didn't shoot the ball well last season coming back from injury, but the 2 previous seasons on very low volume shot around 40% combined on 1.52 attempts a game, like low
and
volume.
I will say, like, if you watch Thomas Bryant shoot, like in workouts, and because he's been playing in runs at the Student Activity Center at UCLA for years now, because he works out with Rico Hines and those guys. When you watch Thomas Bryant shoot, you feel pretty good about Thomas Bryant shooting up until he got hurt, at the very least. So I
think
buy
that's a
Thomas
legit
Bryant
weapon.
shooter.
So and then Austin is probably their, as we were saying, maybe their third best player, but definitely is kind of that connector that can be a secondary ball handler. Shot the ball well the first half of last season, really cratered around January, and if you look at his shooting splits, it was like November, December good, January, February awful, March kind of started to turn the corner, and then closed, like the last month of the season he shot the ball well. But this was a guy who, I mean his scouting report, but was a really good shooter at Wichita State, and I think is someone that the Lakers are confident. I wrote about him this offseason, and I know he's been doing 3-a-days at the facility, 2-a-days shooting, and then working out. So I think he's someone that is bulked up a little bit, is going to be, I think, could be that point of attack defender for them, and then also be someone who can facilitate a little bit. Like, he's compared his game to Joe Ingles. He's kind of said, like, that's the person he's trying to model his game after. And like, there is some of that in him. So I think that's the starting 5. The closing 5, from my understanding, is going to be probably 80 at the 5, Juan Toscano Anderson at the 4, LeBron at the 3, Austin at the 1 or the 2, and then depending on how Russ is playing, like maybe Russ, but there were scenarios in which the Lakers bench him last season down the stretch, and that's where you could maybe see a Troy Brown Jr. as kind of that 3-and-D guy around them, maybe a Kendrick Nunn as someone who's a bit better of a shooter, but can also handle the ball and create a little bit. So I think that 5th spot's kind of open, but it sounds like the Lakers have, regardless of how they've started games, they tend to close games with 80 at the 5. And I think they're high on Juan Toscano Anderson and his fit, and his ability to defend multiple positions, his ability to play make a little bit. He's also shot the ball well on low volume. So I think that's kind of it. But like, how good is that line? Like, we're talking
that's
about
one of the
JTA couldn't crack the rotation in Golden State, and now he's closing games for the Lakers potentially. Like, that's where the concern is with this group. And again, LeBron and AD, we've seen it before that those two just together can be so dynamic and powerful and dominant. But it didn't work last year, right? With the kind of a similar, I think last year's supporting cast was markedly worse in just that. How many, like they got 6 or 7 guys who are on last year's team that are out of the league now, like Avery Bradley, Trevor Ariza, Kent Bazemore finally got signed. Like, Dwight Howard's out of the league, Wayne Ellington, DJ Augustine, like all these guys were starting or playing heavy minutes, and they're out of the league now. So like, I do think this year's roster is better. I really like the Damian Jones pickup. I think Troy Brown is solid for what they need him to do. Lonnie Walker was the one guy. I'm curious on you having scouted Lonnie, like what you think of him, because I guess he's Malik Monk light, but like he shot 31% on threes last year. I know it was a down shooting year, but like, I just think for what they needed, and for the guys that went for the taxpayer MLE, like looking at an Otto Porter, a Bruce Brown, like those guys would have made a lot more sense for what the Lakers needed versus just an undersized kind of microwave scorer who's a streaky shooter and doesn't really play defense.
Yeah. The thing with Lonnie is that he is a real athlete. He has the potential to shoot. Where I've always liked him most is kind of attacking off of spot ups and using the threat of his jumper to be able to create. I feel like he's going to be able to do that a little bit easier in Los Angeles than where he was able to do so in San Antonio. But the defense is kind of the thing. Like when they signed him, I assumed it was for like the minimum. And I was like, oh yeah, like this is great. Like this makes a lot of sense. You know, they still have their taxpayer MLE, like they can go do stuff. And then it wasn't. And I was like, oh, you just paid a lot of money to Lonnie for a year to be able to try and make this work. Yeah, look, I think he's a better shooter than 31% from three. I think he's probably more of like a 35 to 37% three-point shooter, especially if you get him the shot off of closeouts. He is capable of putting the ball on the deck. He can get downhill, get to the rim. He has improved a little bit in terms of his ability to like see the court and make plays. Look, he's just going to be a little bit more limited. And if the defense isn't there, he's another guy that like has tools and should be good defensively, but just straight up hasn't been good defensively throughout the course of his career. I don't feel great about it. I'll say that. Like I feel like he'll be like a sixth man, seventh man off the bench for the Lakers, and that's kind of what it comes down to. Like this is a group of sixth or seventh men without like any starters really next to LeBron and AD, and just kind of running through the West here. Like this team is not better than the Golden State Warriors. That's one. This team is not better than the Phoenix Suns. That's two. This team is not better. Not better than the Clippers, not better than the Memphis Grizzlies. That's 3 and 4. Not better than the Minnesota Timberwolves. That's 5. Not better than the Dallas Mavericks. That's 6. Now you're in the play-in area, and then you have Denver. That's 7. I don't know. The Pelicans, like I think the Pelicans
close, but
very easily.
They were better last year, and they're getting Zion back.
So that's not great. So like, look, this is where the Lakers are. And this, I think, goes to show as like a closing point. This is why the Lakers need to make a move. This is why the Lakers need to make a decision on trying to go all in with, if they can, for a Kyrie Irving, a team that is, instead of those guys, if it's LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Miles Turner, Buddy Hield, and Austin Reeves as a closing lineup, you can maybe swing that. Like that, you can maybe make that work at a pretty high level, especially whenever you have the other guys coming off the bench and providing actual depth, as opposed to guys that may be just like punching a little bit above their weight in the closing lineup. Like if you can bring Juan Toscano-Anderson as a change of pace as your seventh man, that feels pretty good to me. If he's your closing guy that you're relying on every single night, I'm a little bit worried. I really like Juan. Like I love the story. I think that his versatility as a player is really underrated, but he's just very limited because he doesn't put the ball on the deck well. So yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really, they need to make a move.
And look, I think the biggest thing for me is like, I think that there's clearly a talent upgrade, and there's a scenario that there's a universe. I don't know if it's this universe in which Russell Westbrook does buy into his role and does like, he's physically capable. Like, I think the thing that gets lost in the Russ conversation the most is like, Russ is still very talented. I think he could go, he reminds me, I'm not the first person to make this comparison, but he reminds me a lot of Allen Iverson, like especially late career Allen Iverson, where it's just the way that he plays and his skill set does not lend itself to transition. Like he can't really do the Vince Carter or like the Paul Pierce kind of transition into being a role player, just because he just doesn't have that skill set. He kind of needs the ball, and he's not a good shooter, and just kind of at the core of it. So I think like there's a scenario in which Russ is, bought in and playing better and has a better season and maybe kind of regresses more to his mean and with his finishing and shooting and stuff. But the two biggest issues on this team last season were, aside from obviously health, which you can't really control, like perimeter defense and 3-point shooting. And they did not really improve either one of those. If anything, on paper, they're a worse shooting team than last season. Like they lost their two best role player shooters in Carmelo Anthony and Malik Monk. And then perimeter, like I think the front court defense got better with with Jones and Bryant and JTA, but like, I mean, like Troy Brown, I think has some defensive potential. He's shown some flashes of that kind of 3-and-D skill set. Lonnie, as we've discussed, isn't a plus defender. And then you just look at the rest of the team. It's like, aside from Austin, like Talon has been an inconsistent defender. Kendrick Nunn is 6'1". Russ is, we already talked about Russ's defense. Like, you look at the rest of this group and it's like, this is like, they're not good defensively. And I wrote like, they might have the worst shooting collection, talent in the league. Like last season, LeBron was the only guy on this roster that shot above league average from 3-point range. Troy Brown Jr. was exactly at league average. And I know some like Thomas Bryant should bounce back. Lonnie Walker should bounce back, but like they don't have the Buddy Hield, the Kyle Korver, the JJ Redick. Like they don't have that type of shooter that I think you would ideally like to have around an AD and a LeBron. So there's a lot of guys who've JTA shot well, but he shot well in low volume. Thomas Bryant, low volume. Like, so I think the shooting for me is the biggest concern. And that's where if they do the Pacers deal, to me, that's like, it's probably a better consolation prize than people are giving it credit for, just because I think Buddy Hield around LeBron and AD would be such a great fit. You could go Buddy and Austin Reeves in the backcourt. Austin can be that secondary ball handler. Now you have some more size in the backcourt. Buddy's not a great defender, but he at least is big. So yeah, I mean, I think they're in a tough spot, but as you said, I think they got to go all in, and LeBron kept his side of the bargain, and now it's on the Lakers to make some type of move. I don't know if they can get Kyrie, but I think they can get something that's better than the current roster, and the impetus is on them to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to close. I think that's the perfect place to close. Jovan, tell the people where they can find your work. Tell the people where they can find you on social media, because it's important.
Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram at Jovan Buha, Jovan Buha, and you can read all my work at The Athletic on the Lakers page and the NBA page. So be sure to check it out.
Oh, it's so great to talk to you.
Yes,
it's
sir.
Great.
What time is it? What time is it over there?
It is 9:30, probably 9:30 in the morning.
Okay.
Day after a football game, I went to the last Essendon football game of the year last night. It was a nice little time. So we're just rolling, baby. It's a Sunday. You have a Saturday night to look forward to. You can go out. You can find some UFC fights out at the bar. Like you're in a good spot, baby.
I am. I'm gonna go meet up with some buddies.
Love it. That's fantastic. All right. This has been the Game Theory Podcast. Please remember, rate, review, subscribe. We will be back on Monday night with the weekly Adam Spinella podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about prospects, things like that. Then later in the week, I might try and do a Nets podcast. We're going to try and get up to 3 times a week here. It's a little bit hard right now, obviously, right? Like we're in the middle of the offseason. The offseason's a bit rough. But especially once September starts turning over, we're definitely going to get up to 3 times a week. But until next time, folks,